All right, guys, this is video one of the review. Basically, we're going to cover everything that we can, probably a couple sections at a time. Westward expansion, industrial revolution. We're going to get started. So just read along with us as we go. This is basically a lecture. I'll have some questions at the end that you can sort of answer and check to see if you get right. So we're going to look at the EOC now. We're going to have some brainstorming, things like that. Basically, this is the PowerPoint that I normally use. We just don't have time, so that's why I've recorded it. So here we go. Let's first talk about the Homestead Act. Homestead Act, huge law that the government made in 1862. A settler could borrow or purchase a homestead up to 160 acres of land for only $10, and they got to keep the land if they lived there for 5 years. This is a pull factor. A lot of people from other countries came to America for this cheap land. A lot of Americans who were living in the eastern section, the light blue section on this map, moved to the Great Plains for a new life, adventure, living the American dream. Before this, land was extremely expensive. So it brought a lot of people to the West wanting that American dream. Okay, obviously, who was already over there? The Native Americans were there. We had to deal with them. We had to find a way to get them off of the land that we had just sold that now belonged to these homesteaders. One of the first things we did was we forced them on reservations. We did that. As you see on the map on the left, you can see here is the dark land. This is all the land the Native Americans had in 1775. Because of the Dawes Act, because of reservations, what you see now is the land that they have currently. This is 1894. So they lost 90% of their land because of westward expansion. The Dawes Act basically took them on their reservations and broke them up even further, trying to make them more like us, make them American farmers, make them ranchers, and we wanted to be able to deal with them in a peaceful way, and we basically destroyed their way of life. They were used to living together as a tribe. They were used to living as hunters and gatherers. They were used to hunting the buffalo. That's another reason why the Native American culture died out. They were used to hunting the buffalo, and we just massacred the buffalo. Millions of buffalo were killed by white hunters. And what you see on the right, this is the process of assimilation, changing them from their original culture to what we want them to be, more like us, and basically destroy the entire Native American culture. Here's a few questions that we're going to go over. Number one, in the period from 1860 to 1900, the federal government encouraged the settlement of the West by A, passing an increased number of liberal immigration laws, B, selling the most fertile land to Native American Indians, C, providing free transportation to settlers moving to the frontier, D, granting tracts of land to railroad companies to encourage construction. Federal government encouraged settlement of the West. How they did that was by granting tracts of land to railroad companies. This is what they gave the railroads to build the railroad. And once the railroad was built, towns started springing up. So this is another reason the Native American cultures went away, because we were taking over the West. First started with the railroads. That brings workers in. After the railroads get built, people are going to want to live out there next to the railroads. That's the Homestead Act. Okay. So the next part, number two, in the late 1800s, the goal of the federal government's policy towards Native American Indians was to A, destroy tribal bonds and thus weaken their traditional cultural values, B, grant them full citizenship and due process, C, give their tribal groups authority over their own affairs, D, increase the land holdings of Western tribes. Remember, we wanted to solve the Indian problem, and the best way to do that was by A, destroying their tribal bonds and weakening their traditional cultural values. Assimilation, making them live on reservations, making them more like us through the Dawes Act, which made them farmers and ranchers. Number three, in which pair of events did the first event most directly influence the second? A, discovery of gold in California led to the Louisiana Purchase. B, building of the Transcontinental Railroad led to the disappearance of the frontier. C, settling of the Oregon Territory led to the passage of the Homestead Act. Or D, assimilation of Native American Indians into American society led to the passage of the Dawes Act. The best answer here of an event that led to another is going to be B. When they built the Transcontinental Railroad, all that open range, all that wilderness went away and became cities and towns. and the buffalo were gone. The Indians were after that. So the Transcontinental Railroad changed everything in America. It connected the East and the West. It doubled more than doubled the size of America as far as towns and cities go. And people finally had a way to travel safely from the east side of America to the west. Those are positive things, but again, negative things: the disappearance of the frontier, the disappearance of the buffalo, the disappearance of the Native American way of life. So although it was good for American growth, it was definitely bad for Native Americans. Okay. Grange, we're not talking about populism. When you think the Grange, think grain farmers. The Grange was a group of farmers who first worked together, and their other name is Patrons of Husbandry. Don't get confused by that. What they wanted to do, they wanted to increase the prices for their farm products, and their farm products started to be so low because of new technology. All these new tractors and reapers and binders was very expensive, and because it was because you could farm easier and you could farm more supply of farm products meant lower prices for those farm products. And so what the Grangers wanted, they wanted a couple things. They wanted higher prices for their crops. They also wanted lower rates to ship their products, and the railroads were abusing farmers. They were charging them high prices to ship their crops, and it was just tough for these farmers to make a living. And so the Grange movement is the small movement, and that movement leads on to the Populist Party. The Populist Party is a third party, and they wanted these things. They wanted more money, which is going to help raise the prices of their crops. They wanted money to be made from silver. They called it free coinage of silver, free silver, or also known as bimetallism. They also wanted taxes to be more fair. They wanted to have what they call a graduated income tax, which means you're based on the amount of income you make. Farmers had to pay taxes on their crops and on their tractors and on everything, and by the end of the year, they paid way more taxes than somebody like me who's just a teacher, and I pay taxes on basically what I provide, which is my service, which is my teaching. So they wanted a more fair way to tax people. They also wanted the direct election of senators. They didn't feel like they were being represented fairly. People in the major cities were getting all the elected officials, and they were being listened to, but people on the farms were not. So they wanted direct election of senators. They also wanted what they call a secret ballot, where when you went to go vote, you'd have secrecy, privacy when you voted. All three of these things did happen. They did get the graduated income tax. They did get the direct election of senators. They did get secret ballot. However, they didn't get these two things. They did not get money. Okay, they didn't get the increase in money supply that they wanted. The man's name who ran for the Populist Party, his name was William Jennings Bryan. This is him. And he ran for president on the promise to make money out of silver, which is called free unlimited coinage of silver, or free silver, or what they call bimetallism. And he was against what they call the gold standard, which is what we base our money off of. And even though he had the support of the populace, when he finally went to be elected, he sort of lied and said, I don't really care about making more money for these farmers. And he lost the election. So the reason we studied the Populist Party is, again, because even though they didn't get an elected official as president, they did get two reforms. The first being the 16th Amendment, the progressive income tax, and the second being the 17th Amendment, senators are directly elected. The other thing, besides banks that they hated, were the railroads. I told you that. They wanted the government to regulate the rates that railroads would charge. And later on, they got that. It's called the Interstate Commerce Commission that uses the Interstate Commerce Act, which says basically railroads can't overcharge one group of people and give other people a discount. And it sets a specific rate. You can't go higher than a certain rate. You can't give discounts to some and overcharge others. So farmers were improved a little bit by the populist movement. Okay, these are some factor questions about populism. So is it true or false? In the late 19th century, farmers desired cheap money policies because farmers believed that rising prices for their crops would enable them to pay back their loans more easily. Is that fact or crap? That's actually fact. That's the whole reason they wanted more money, because it would raise the prices of their crops and they could pay back their debts easier. Letter B, during the 1870s and 1880s, Midwestern farmers found that earning a living was increasingly difficult because prices of agricultural products were increasing. That's crap. The reason why that earning a living was hard because they had low prices for their crops because of new technology. Okay. Letter C, although the Populist Party failed to elect its candidates to the presidency, some of the party's aims were later achieved by the adoption of the gold standard. That's crap. They didn't want the gold standard. They hated the gold standard. In fact, one of William Jennings Bryan's speeches was the Cross of Gold speech, which he said, the cross of gold will crucify us. It's going to kill farmers and our way of life because we need more money. We need money to be based on silver and gold, called bimetallism. Letter D, the Populist Party was important in U.S. history because it proposed ideas that later became law. That is totally fact, because they did have some amendments passed, some organizations made. All that is the whole reason we study the Populist Party, because even though they never had a president elected from the Populist Party, a lot of their ideas later became law. Letter E, in the second half of the 19th century, agriculture in the United States was transformed most by the decline in population growth rate of the United States. That is crap. The number one, there wasn't a decline in the population growth rate. More immigrants came to America. The second thing, it wasn't transformed. Agriculture was not transformed because of that. Agriculture was transformed because of new technology, which did two things. It made farming easier as far as to do, and you could grow more, but because supply went up, prices went down. So even though farmers had an easier time actually doing the work because of technology, it was harder on them because prices went down, and these machines that they were having to use to compete were very expensive. And again, that's the whole Populist Party. Farmers had a tough time, they joined together, and they created the Populist Party to try to improve their conditions. All right, we're going to take a break right there. We're going to come back to the next section here in just a minute. That was 12 minutes. The next section should be on the Industrial Revolution and immigration to the United States.